want to thank my fellow councillors. Congratulations again on your success, and I look forward to working with you in the coming 4 years. We have an agenda in front of us, and I guess we start. Are there any conflicts that any members of council wish to declare? Yes, thank you. We are dealing with the amended agenda that was issued yesterday, and in that respect, again, just to stay on point, are there anybody with conflicts? Hearing and I might have one. Please, can you turn your microphone on, please? The button on the bottom. Yeah.
Do you have a short-term rental license for bed and breakfast
Mm-hmm.
for this year? So I might have to excuse myself. I don't know what you're going to discuss, but I can leave with that in mind.
So, okay, so you're of the view that you have a conflict. So
it's possible, I don't know, or perceived.
Fine, yeah. Okay, well, I think that's certainly up to each individual councillor to assess that. So if you feel that way, we'll excuse you during that part of the meeting. We'll move then to adoption of the agenda, the amended agenda. Could I have a motion to that, to adopt? Moved Councillor Inkster, seconded Councillor Shepherd. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, item 5.1 is an item that I requested yesterday in my capacity as the presiding officer of the meeting be included. I think council has had time to review it. I hope the public has had an opportunity to go through it. This is something that's come up quite suddenly because we learned on Monday, council, that there had been some legal action taken with respect to short-term rentals. And I guess I want to first of all say I hate late items on agendas. And I know some of my fellow councillors are of the same view. But there are exceptions, and I believe this is one. During the election, I was clear that I felt the short-term rental bylaw process was flawed, and I believe we need more and better data about things like the number of complaints that we've actually received and what we've done to assess them. I've got a whole long list of things that we could talk about, but perhaps I should first receive the report that was provided. Councillors, yes, thank you, Councillor Toth, and Councillor Inkster, second, to receive the report. All in favor? Wait. Okay, so perhaps I start with, instead of my comments, discussion and where council is on this. Councillor Shepherd, please.
I have to say have a lot of problem with moving ahead if this is to be moved ahead as a motion. I really think that we all ran on water as our primary issue, and I don't know why this item is being forced to the head, the first significant issue that we're all discussing. I really think we should be talking about water first, because there are so many, we're in such a desperate situation. I think in terms of the short-term bylaw, we have a process that's being approved by the prior council. I know that we're facing litigation, but I don't know why that's prompting us to make significant changes to the bylaw that's been put into place.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the election's over. We do have a process that we're proceeding down. I would hesitate to guess at the number of staff hours that have gone into the process so far, not to mention consulting time, public engagement, et cetera. I think if there is something, something relating to this legal action, we should wait until we're briefed on it before we have this conversation. So I'm actually going to suggest that we refer to this to the next committee of the whole. So I'd like to make that motion, please.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Okay. Yep. Discussion? I'd like to, if I may, please, Councillor Rowe.
Yes, I was going to second that motion as well. I just want to make a point that a lot of this looks operational to me, and I mean, a lot of this we haven't had discussion about. So I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. I know this was an area that touched both sides of the fence. There wasn't very much middle of the road ground, but I feel like so much work was done, whether the people that aren't happy want to recognize it or not. If the tree falls in the forest, it still makes a noise. The work was still done. Staff have put in hours. We have spent money on consultants, whether you think the data, not you specifically, but you, the royal you, think the data is there or not. We know that we're not going to have proper bylaw, people calling in with complaints because we know that they're not, because we don't have bylaw on the weekend. So, I mean, I think we can go down a rabbit hole here. I don't think a lot of this actually falls under the label of governance. I'm happy to further discuss it at another committee of the whole meeting, but, we have to recognize that discussing it and also encompasses that other side of the community consultation. If we don't understand this side, then do we understand the other? The Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing feels very strongly that this bylaw will help their rental situation. So I think I'm not interested in going down the road of a fulsome, let's relook at this whole topic. If there's a piece of it and it's around governance, then perhaps, but I'm with Councillor Shepherd. There's so many more areas that staff are going to be really excited to hear about that we want them to do. And I'm not sure, I feel strongly that relooking at this whole bylaw is not one of them.
Other comments? Councillor Inkster.
So what I'm hearing then is there's a motion in front of us to move this to 2 weeks from now. I'm wondering if, through you, to staff, if in fact we, in 2 weeks, discuss it some more, will we have any more light cast on the issue that's been presented in the note presented to us from yourself, and whether any decisions made at that meeting will affect what appears to be a hard deadline of the new year of implementation of the new bylaw. So that's a procedural question that I have through you, is if we discuss it, do we then run out of time to make changes to the implementation of a bylaw, or does it continue, or do we then put it in abeyance at that point procedurally? Because if we go down the road of just continuing to talk about it, then the existing bylaw will come in. My concern with the bylaw as presented, and this can happen with newly elected people because you were not part of the process, is that what I'm hearing is, and there's some ownership on this council of the hard work that went into it, but what I'm hearing is that it's an imperfect bylaw. So my concern is the implementation of an imperfect bylaw and the challenges that were referenced by the mayor at the beginning of the meeting that comes with an imperfect bylaw. So I think as a council that is beginning, we need to make sure that we bring in a bylaw that is as close to what we want and as close to perfect as we can introduce in the first few months of our term. If it is not, then we need to make changes to that bylaw, and we have time. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Inkster. Perhaps a couple of comments for council from me. This was in no way meant to imply that I'm suggesting we change the bylaw. It is, I acknowledge, quite operational in the content. When I started drafting it on this past weekend, it was to be something to go to staff for their input. unfortunately, when we all learned about the legal action on Monday, I felt it was urgent to get this in front of you and perhaps the public, that we are in fact working on this. I'm very disappointed that the people that decided to take this action did so, and candidly, without any comments about the legalities of it, I hope they will withdraw their action. But my fundamental thing here today is to highlight that I think we can do a better job of implementing the bylaw as it is currently drafted and gain some better knowledge in which perhaps, Councillor Inkster, we can do some crafting in the future, not in the next few weeks. I'm proposing essentially that let's get everybody playing on the same set of rules. Let's find out what the short-term rental market really is. Let's find out if any of these people might be convinced to be long-term renters in the future. But having said that, I will be supporting the motion to defer it for 2 weeks to Cal. Please, Councillor Bell.
I think...
Pull the microphone down.
Oh, thank you. I think as well that, being that I don't have a lot of the information at this point in terms of what the background information is, the report, the consulting report, et cetera, what was actually in that report. What I'm hearing is there is not enough data that's an outside perspective, to be able to create this bylaw. But I don't feel I have enough information at this point to be able to decide whether in fact we go forward or we not. So I would definitely defer it to later, whether it's 2 weeks or whether it's a month. I don't think it is a priority right now, and I would like to suggest that we start back again and we look at what our priorities are. I know we're feeling a little pressure from the outside on this one, but I would like to say that we at least defer it. If we're going to defer for 2 weeks, I agree with you. What does that mean? What's going to change in 2 weeks? What's our discussion going to be in 2 weeks? It's going to be the same discussion.
Well, I could jump in that within 2 weeks, I think it's fair that you're suggesting, I believe in the motion, Councillor Toth, that it come back to us in 2 weeks. It does give staff some time to review perhaps what I've commented on and add their own comments so that we'd have some form of a recommendation, kind of looking for am I on the right track? So the motion is to defer it and have it come back to Committee of the Whole in 2 weeks.
Your
Is that right? Yes, please.
Just a procedural matter. The motion was actually referred to the next Cal, and the only reason I point that out is a deferral motion. There's no discussion. So what council's doing right now is considering referring it to the next Committee of the Whole meeting. That was the motion. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Please, Councillor Inkster.
So what I was, and I'm glad, thank you, Ms. Frank, about clarifying the defer, refer, because then we talked about it, so it was incorrect. The issue then I ask then, is there time to make changes to a bylaw that's slated to go forward for implementation in the new year? If in fact we decide whether the changes need to be made, is there time? Where is the bylaw at for clarity? Is it third reading?
No, it's adopted.
It's adopted.
Yeah.
Oh, it's adopted.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had heard third reading. Okay, so
this is more, if I may just interject, it's more about the implementation, which is why I quite agree. There's much of this is operational, and given the what I perceive to be the urgency is why I brought it forward.
Yeah, the implementation piece, though, is it not the bylaw has a date of implementation?
There is some, yes, there's some, what would you call it, I guess, procedures, accepting applications effective January 1st, I believe.
With particular fees attached, et cetera.
Yes.
Yes, which will be expecting people to come up with when we're not sure about the bylaw.
Council could certainly introduce or direct that we amend the bylaw, but that would take presumably several weeks or months to do because we'd be into several readings.
Okay, but the changes that you're proposing, would that not make changes to the bylaws, ergo the amending of the bylaw?
Please, CAO Yates.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
You may find, once you've read the background reports, the consultants' reports, the Granicus, data, everything else, that you're still looking at operational changes, not the actual bylaw changes. So you may find the rollout or, I think criteria was mentioned in there, and a few other things may not affect the bylaw at all. So 2 weeks is not going to be a big problem as long as you're willing to do a lot of reading between now and then.
Thanks. So, Corporate Officer Frank, what, are we still doing referral or deferral?
Well, we've talked about it a lot.
Yes, I know.
To refer at this point, right?
Your worship, just
Are you
to
willing to
clarify.
amend? You did say
Your worship,
referral.
just to clarify, the motion that's on the floor, as we heard it, was that it be referred to next Cal, moved and seconded.
Right, right. You live with that?
Gonna call the vote on it?
Day one. Okay, you ready for the question? Are you clear what you're voting on? All in favor of referral to the next Cal? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you for, everyone's, indulgence on that. Thanks, thanks, Ian. There, we'll bring, back, Councillor McLaughlin into the meeting at 3:16. All right, we get to turn the microphone and the camera and our attention to our Director of Planning, Mr. Andrew Allen, for Planning 101.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship, and pleasure to present here. And I've invited my colleagues, Mr. Ian Hall, who's our Manager of Development Planning, and Mr. Sven Koberwitz, who is our Senior Development Planner. And also on Zoom, I believe we have Mr. Samuel Hogg. Samuel is a policy planner. He works with us part-time. He resides in Vancouver. I speak to him daily. I haven't seen him in person for some time now, but he does a lot of good work for us, and he's already getting a head start on review of the background and the scoping exercise behind a future official community plan review. And I thought it was important for him to observe and listen here as well. We also have Marina Stepovic, who's a community planner who interfaces with a lot of these types of issues. And then a planning technician who's our front counter, email, phone specialist, Mark Dallaire, who also gives us ground truthing and helping understand what it's like for members of the public to be receiving a lot of this information. So we do have a brief presentation. The three of us will walk you through in our various areas of expertise, and we'll try to be succinct on that. And if there are any very small detail or specific questions, we can answer on the fly, but in terms of the bigger questions in the discussion, it's likely more effective at the very end of this presentation, if that works for the committee. Thank you. So, Floria, if you would mind sharing the screen, or here. Okay. So it's a huge topic. We have 33 slides here. We will attempt to go quickly. The first and 33rd slides are just cover. So nonetheless, bear with us and we will talk fast. So here's a bit of an outline today. We have an integrated community sustainability plan. It's not as well known as an OCP, the official community plan, or a zoning bylaw, but it is a high-level document. It's important. We're reviewing it, particularly as we start scoping towards a future OCP review, should we be directed by council to do so, of course. Touching on Advisory Planning Commission, the APC, we meet with them on a monthly basis here in this room in the evenings. The development process generally, the various types of applications, as well as some of our key housing applications that have recently been approved or are underway. I won't touch on the ones that we kind of know about but aren't yet official because they're not quite public yet, but there's a lot coming in terms of housing, particularly multi-unit development in the downtown core. Some policy planning, which I'll again touch on short-term rental zoning bylaw, official community plan, which blends into what we refer to as upcoming work here in the title screen. Thank you, Ian. Clicker not working.
Oh.
No, kind of the screen. It's like starting from scratch every time. Okay. So as I say, the Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, or the not-so-catchy acronym ICSP, is, I don't want to say underappreciated, but it's not as well known. I mean, I think people think of OCPs, a lot of people in Canada, folks are aware of that. But the Integrated Community Sustainability Plan is a high-level document that applies to our operations as a whole. And it identifies values. It identifies our community values, our environmental values. It does provide that higher-level vision, not only for the OCP, but all kinds of plans throughout our organization. And unlike a bylaw or anything more specific, it also supports community-based initiatives. It's meant to be a partnership with our community. And it has a variety of goals ranging from sustainability and well-being to economic and environmental sustainability, arts and culture. It speaks to planning for climate change, which is a key area for us moving forward. And it speaks to community growth and just general leadership, particularly regarding community sustainability. So it is a high-level document. It is important for us to utilize it, to remember that we have it, and to use it embedded into our policy and our goals and our approval process. I'll pass over to Ian, and he'll talk a little bit about the official community plan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So something you'll probably get used to using a lot more, the official community plan, something that we in the planning department will obviously speak to a lot in a lot of our reports. Again, as Andrew has said, again, this is the sort of high-level policy document that will inform the zoning bylaw, the actual regulations, and the OCP sets out objectives, policies, really meant to guide land use planning and management, looking at creating land use designations across the district, residential, commercial, rural, agricultural, industrial, as well as getting into more specific neighborhood areas and perhaps specific land use policies in those areas, as well as development permit areas. Don't bother trying to read the figure 17, but this is something we referred to during the zoning bylaw 580 project, and is something that sort of informs at a high level the different density parameters that apply to the different land use designations to give you a range in terms of units per hectare, floor area ratio. This is something that certainly informed the creation of the zones in bylaw 580 and the density levels that were set there, as well as speaking to the different land use designations, the special infill areas. This would be something we would be looking at as part of an OCP update, looking at density levels we've talked about, moving away from units per hectare to just floor area ratio and other things. So this, moving forward, we would be looking at that, as well as probably the other big piece of the OCP, development permit areas, covering everything from design and appearance of buildings, hazards, land stability, environmental issues, and management. Again, there's different development permit areas outlined in the OCP. Numbers 1 to 5 cover environmental and hazard areas, from gravel pits to water courses, marine foreshore, rockfall hazards, and steep slopes. There's certainly a lot of development that will come through for development permit areas, 2 to 5 anyway. A lot that you won't see because it's been delegated to staff to deal with in terms of single-family development. Obviously, larger scale applications will come before council, and you'll certainly see more on the 6 to 10 and 11 in terms of form and character, commercial, multifamily, industrial, and again, covering everything from downtown areas to just multifamily or infill residential, as well as commercial and industrial areas. And then from the OCP, which sets out, again, the policy that guides the regulations in the zoning bylaw, we have the bylaw itself for zoning that creates zones with specific boundaries, regulating use of land, buildings and structures, density, siting size, location of uses, and really where we are now with the recent adoption of bylaw 580, again, while it's sort of been a project on and off for the last 10 years, the more recent project coming from being presented to Council in 2019 really intended to implement and align with OCP policies, replace Bylaw 25, again, dating back to 1987. And moving forward, again, even though the zoning bylaw has been adopted, we previously talked about that commitment to monitor and improve, adapt the bylaw over time. We're looking at probably a first housekeeping amendment potentially before the end of the year to address some minor issues that were noted during the process, but over time, as we work through the bylaw, seeing how the regulations work or don't work and making improvements over time. I think it skipped one. Okay, so again, not needing to read that, just a summary of the table of contents in the new zoning bylaw, just highlighting that one of the biggest issues was even just a structural formatting change, grouping zones together in like categories, allowing us to more easily amend the bylaw in future, and kind of providing a bit more structure and flow in terms of how the intensity of uses is grouped together from lower intensity to higher intensity, and highlighting too some of the newer residential and multifamily zones that again provide an opportunity to implement OCP policies to allow for more density within the parameters set out by the OCP. And then the next slide, when it finally gets there, talking about the Advisory Planning Commission. Again, this is an advisory body that provides review on all sorts of different development applications, primarily rezoning and development permits. They'll provide comments to the applicants and make recommendations to council on everything from land use, site design to when we're dealing with development permit applications, form and character issues and landscaping. So again, like as Andrew mentioned, meeting monthly. We had a meeting just last week on a newer rezoning application, so the minutes will be carried forward to council for their review. And as we move forward, those sort of recommendations from APC will come to council fairly regularly. And again, they provide a valuable input through the process to provide different perspectives. I'll turn it over to Sven Koweritz to talk about the development process.
Thank you. This is really the meat and potatoes of a lot of the policy work that we do, which results in development applications largely driven by private landowners. As we work through proposals, we start with conformity with our OCP, zoning bylaws, any other bylaws, to see if the proposal can be supported just based on the existing regulations that we have. We also check for the existence of development permit areas, whether those be environmental or hazardous, as well as form and character or what developments look and feel like. Finally, once you've been through the process of checking all of these different regulations, applicants can proceed with the actual approval process, which takes the form of a building permit or in some cases subdivision. The OCP and zoning bylaw amendment process is probably the most common way that more comprehensive developments are realized, in that a custom set of regulations are usually amended into the zoning bylaw. Sometimes small tweaks to a zone or a property may even receive a zone that is already existing. So from an existing residential zone to a multifamily zone of that sort. The process starts with pre-application meetings with the applicants, their consultants, trying to get in place a realistic scope of the type of information that staff and council might require to review these applications. From there, once the application is received, we refer it internally to our main departments to catch any major issues that an application might have that would keep it from proceeding. For more complex applications, usually OCP amendments, more substantial density increases, anything that we generally feel council might want to have a look at to give it a permission to proceed, whether we should even spend any more time on it. That's where we would present a permission to proceed report. That's not a reading report. That would direct staff to actually drafting bylaws for your consideration. Once that's complete, we would continue with referral process, especially to the Advisory Planning Commission, neighborhood groups, community associations. The developer generally hosts a public information meeting for the public that would be advertised. Signs are put up. And during this time, staff are also drafting a bylaw for council consideration. At that point, we bring back the initial round of information and results from the public engagement process for a first reading of a bylaw. Once that's complete, we continue with more detailed referrals to other agencies, Ministry of Transportation, Sechelt Nation, Vancouver Coastal Health, the whole gamut of government agencies, and we also prepare for a second reading for council. And it's at that point that we would request permission to schedule a public hearing for the public, statutory public hearing, which is done after second reading generally. That's again notified through signage, newspaper advertisements, social media, and whatnot. And this is the official avenue for people to give council their feedback on the bylaw. Although it's important to realize that at this point, most applications have already been in the public realm for several council sessions as well as a public information meeting. So most of the information at this point will have been digested. Once the public hearing is complete, we present all the results of that to third reading of the bylaw, and this is generally referred to as conditional adoption, where the final conditions that a developer might have to meet as far as legal covenants or amenity contributions or anything like that, that would have to be done before final adoption of the bylaw, which at that point is generally a procedural step for adoption. OCP amendments are not uncommon in our work here, and for the most part, they have been related to density increases rather than land use changes. And that's really a reflection of the changing costs and economic realities of development and the general dated nature of the OCP in those regards. So the maximum of 100 units per hectare tends to be a limit that most developers find needs to be increased, in particular for the projects that have been rental-based, where more units are required to make the projects feasible. So there's been approximately 6 amendments since 2018, and most of those have only been in the scope of a density increase. We do have another process that fairly sometimes makes its way to council, which is a development variance permit. This is a particular type of permit that will vary regulations in a zoning bylaw. It's typically restricted to height, other regulations like parking, siting, or size of buildings and structures. We're not permitted to vary land use and density through a development variance permit. So these are typically used for other matters. There is also an alternative process available to landowners through the Local Government Act to get variances to zoning regulations through the Board of Variance, which is an independent body appointed by council that considers matters of hardship. So this might be a property that's significantly impacted by a natural hazard or some other water of body and a setback that makes it difficult and a hardship to develop, and that would be within their scope of authority to make decisions on those types of matters. I believe Director Allen, there's a meeting coming up of the Board of Variance.
Yes, I'll just briefly jump in. Just by coincidence, we are having a Board of Variance meeting tomorrow afternoon here in this room, as well as virtual hybrid meeting. We haven't had one for several years. Certainly, I've been here for over three and a quarter years, and we have not had a Board of Variance meeting. So we do have a Board of Variance. They have not yet met as a group, but every municipality in the province that has a zoning bylaw must have a Board of Variance. But because the applications are minor and hardship, they are, in a sense, non-political. In this particular case, it's about adding to our eaves trough within a setback. You know, the larger items, the more political items certainly come through development variance permit or zoning amendment bylaws. But I just feel it behooves notice to just jump in the middle of this presentation to say, by coincidence, there's one tomorrow. And you're welcome to attend as an observer, but they are, through tradition and through legislation, strictly independent in their decision making. Thank you.
And now it's my turn to jump in. And who sits on the Board of Variance?
Yes, the Board of Variance is a three-member panel. We have Terry Davies, Joe Rommel, and Felicity Fu. So they've been appointed by council, and we've corresponded with them, but they themselves have never actually met as a group, just simply due to lack of applications. And I'll pass back to Sven. Thank you.
I'll need to take a brief break until the presentation's back up, but if you have any questions, now would be a good time.
With the Board of Variance, how long do the members serve for? Is it always only 3? Just sort of a little more generally about that. Why might somebody choose Board of Variance over a development variance permit or, because it is an option.
Indeed it is. They were appointed by council, and I believe it was a 3-year term. That seems to be our standard procedure. So we advertised, people would write in indicating why they're interested, what their qualifications may be. Now, the Board of Variance applications, through it's defined in the legislation, so it is 3 members for a community of our size. There is an opportunity to have a regional Board of Variance and cooperate with Town of Gibson's and Sunshine Coast Regional District. That was talked about a number of years ago, but didn't proceed. Also, through legislation, it's strictly defined as minor and hardship. However, the intriguing part about that is it's strictly up to the Board of Variance themselves to define what minor is and what hardship is. Staff can provide some insight and some guidance. It's assumed that hardship relates to land, a topographic, geographic hardship, but it has not been ruled out that hardship could be personal or financial, through test cases, through case law, and so forth. But I think it's simpler to think about it as being environmental, topographical in that regard. We're duty bound to describe both processes and allow the applicant to choose. A development variance permit is registered on the title of the property like a covenant and becomes binding, whereas a Board of Variance is not. It's reliant on corporate storage. There's all kinds of intriguing differences. Over the years, development variance permit has been more common. But when I was working at SCRD, for example, a number of occasions, the SCRD themselves was in fact the applicant for setbacks for a sewage pump house building, for the arts building in Madeira Park, and it seemed to be more appropriate that an independent panel make the decision rather than the board themselves. So there's a host of reasons. Generally speaking, when it's larger and more impactful, it's development variance permits so that it's put forward in front of elected officials.
Okay, so the next thing, the final approval step in any development is generally the building permit. And while much of the public attention tends to be on the rezoning process, it's the building permit process that I personally find to be the most complex part of a development approval, particularly with multifamily and commercial buildings. And now I'll just go over some of the housing applications that we're currently dealing with and that have been recently approved. And one of the tools that we make available to the public and council, of course, is the development tracker, which we try to keep up to date with all active applications. So it's not a historical log of every application, but it's certainly things that we're currently working on or have recently been worked on. So some of the recent projects that we've worked on is the community services building, which was a mixed-use residential and office use building for 34 rental units for women with children. This is a BC Housing project done in partnership with Community Services, and they're currently in the funding stages of the project. The development permit was issued previously, and it's ready for building permit considerations. Also recently approved is the TELUS Living building. That's a 59-unit rental building with mixed-use commercial on the ground floor, as well as parking within the building. This project is currently in for building permit as well. Then we also have 5680 Ebtide Street. This was a rezoning and development permit for a 28-unit market rental building. This the approvals are all in place, and it's also under review for building permit issuance at this time. And finally, 5845 Sunshine Coast Highway, or the RTC Shorncliffe project, is two 3-story apartment-style buildings with single-level units, 10 units in each building, for a total of 20 strata apartments at the waterfront here. There's a number of new applications that are continue to be under review, or so, for example, Mills Road is a townhouse and duplex complex for 34 units. That's still under review for development permit. We also have a 109-unit apartment rental building at Shorncliffe across from the elementary school that's currently under consideration and was recently presented to the Advisory Planning Commission. And finally, Shoal Way, another greenfield site for 102 townhouse units that's under review. And each of these, not the Mills Road, but certainly Shorncliffe and Shoal Way, are two examples that include OCP amendments for density. And I'll hand it back over to Director Allen for the policy segment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, this slide was already in the presentation, so here we are. Just wanted to say that, of course, the development end of things is higher profile and captures a lot of attention of staff, council, and the public, but there are many other projects underway from community level planning, policy planning, and so forth. And so I'll just give a very quick flyover on this one in particular. So it started in earnest around this time last year and was presented to council twice in December to identify the goals of this project. And then once we had the goals and the criteria that we're looking for, then we moved into some engagement and had a number of meetings and survey and so forth. So ultimately, the traditional bed and breakfast and the newer developing emerging short-term residential rental were kind of merged into one and called short-term rental. So within the new zoning bylaw, you don't see the term bed and breakfast anymore. You just see short-term rental, because effectively we determined it, or agreed that it is simply you're on a short-term basis renting out a part of your house, a cottage on your property, or a whole house. So then the three categories are principal residence, which would be your traditional bed and breakfast. Principal residence accessory might be a suite, might be a cottage, something other than within the primary dwelling. And then category 3, the secondary residence, and that being the unhosted short-term rental, if you will. So the amendment to the business license bylaw, and there are some basic parameters within the zoning bylaw respecting parking spaces and so forth, but the primary regulation is within the business license bylaw. And so we have an unlimited number of category 1 and 2 that are permitted. And somebody who is either a long-time business license holder or seeking a new business license in 2023 can apply for category 1 and 2 and receive a license at any time, in theory, assuming we move forward as planned. Whereas the category 3, that was the one that's a little bit different, and it's captured within council resolution rather than within the business license bylaw itself, the expectation, the target that we would be issuing 15 temporary use permits. Now, temporary use permit is basically like temporary zoning. It's designed to issue for 3 years and then reissue for another 3, so we're a total of 6. At that point, the temporary use is now finished, and in 6 years from now, or ahead of 6 years from now, we would have to determine how we would move forward. Would it be an amendment to the zoning bylaw to allow these? Would it be phasing them out? I understand the town of Gibson, for example, is hoping to, or planning to phase them out over time with the hope and expectation that new hotels come online. So that's one option. But a temporary use permit is supposed to distinguish between zoning whereupon there is no lawful nonconformity at the end of it. So it does require a future decision. And so we do have a letter prepped to business license holders that we could send, identifying that this procedure is changing and that council will be looking at consideration of temporary use permits in the new year, likely February. We do have in mind a staff report for council in December, and this could change depending on the previous committee recommendation today, but we are going to provide a staff report with a suggestion of what we might be looking at as staff as criteria that we could use to recommend to council when making a decision on how or if to issue temporary use permits. Some of these things are subjective. Neighborhood fit, for example. There was some discussion about not more than 2 per neighborhood. But what is a neighborhood? Where does Selma Park end and Davis Bay start? Is 150 meters meaningful when talking about separation and so forth, right? So there is some subjectivity in that, so it's a little bit harder to explicitly define what that is. And it was meant to look at, does one have a business license? Have they had one for many years? Are they operating faithfully and suitably? We do know that there are good operators, and we do know that there are absent operators who really don't have solid management plans. Temporary use permits will be a labor-intensive process in terms of notifying property owners or advertising, social media, Coach Reporter. It will inherently open up that debate again. We envisioned a single report, like a batch report, rather than 15 staff reports or whichever that number may be, but a single report where we could present back to council. And so, no question, big project, a lot of work ahead of us. It was a significant amount of time and effort to get here, and certainly staff acknowledge and understand that that was just the beginning of it. There's a lot ahead of us as well. So I'll leave it at that for now. Probably said more than I planned to. But we do other things. We're planning and engineering are working together. We're updating our transportation master plan. And this is a huge project. So what are our growing and changing needs for transportation around Sechelt? How are we going to view efficiencies? The Sunshine Coast, Sechelt is growing, not just with people living here, but with businesses, with visitors. So how do we make new roads, or what do we do with our existing roads? And there's a significant overlap and partnership between planning and engineering on this one, no question. This is underway. Council will see more in the coming weeks and into next year. You'll be given an opportunity to review formally and endorse this plan, or make changes, of course. So it is an ongoing project that you can, as a group, expect to see and hear more on. And then finally, the OCP review. At the final council of the previous term, there was some discussion about, is this going to be focused on downtown? Is this going to be focused on the district of Sechelt as a whole? We see a lot of good in the current OCP. We recognize it was adopted in 2011, which is about average age for official community plans. So there's a lot of good in there, but there's a lot of areas for efficiency and a lot of areas that require update. There's no question. I think that over the last number of years, policy planning has not kept pace with development planning at District of Sechelt. And there's, whether it's EV chargers, whether it's climate adaptation, density in the downtown, parking, confirming our servicing strategies with our own engineering division, with SCRD and the infrastructure and water capital planning, and of course the bigger question on water. There's a lot to do, and we're excited about that, and we'll be discussing this further in the budget process and work planning confirmation as this council moves on and gets moving in. So we're excited about this project and have subtly in the background already commenced, but open to specific council direction on that and how to move forward. And that's it. I hope we didn't take too long going through our 32 slides, and as promised, the final slide is just a picture. Happens to be one of my personal favorite parks, already gone. Burnett Falls, Porpoise Bay. Little known, yep. Quite easy to get to, quite rewarding when you're there, especially when there's been lots of rain to push the water down the hill. So thank you.
Good, thank you, Director Allen and your team. Thanks, guys. Any questions, I guess? Councillor Inkster.
Thanks for the presentation, staff. The OCP discussion that you presented and the fact that you mentioned that there was some good pieces to it, I appreciate those comments, but we all know that OCPs have a shelf life in the sense that they need to, in some senses, adjust. But what I would suggest, and hope that we have full discussion on before we move in a full-scale direction of change, is that we look at pieces that was done before, and that there's nothing wrong with doing now, which is looking at parts of Seashelt and looking at OCP amendments in those parts. So the downtown core is a part of Seashelt that we see some change in as indicative of the density changes, and that's a reflection of the sensibility of density in your downtown core. And the other changes in the downtown core is a major transportation corridor. So I would hope that we discuss that as an OCP change rather than a full-scale district OCP change with neighborhoods within the district that will be uncomfortable with density and zoning changes within those neighborhoods. So I think we have to be sensitive to parts of the district that may not see large developmental change because of topography and the fact that there's some maturity to those areas of Seashelt that we may not have to make more changes to. West Seashelt could be another consideration as well because of the large landmass that West Seashelt is. But just to discuss maybe neighborhood by neighborhood changes within the district rather than a complete OCP change with all the zoning and the density changes that may cause some frustration in some of the districts. And I have other comments, but that's just one.
Thank you, Councillor Inkster. And with that in mind, Director Allen, do you have any recommendations or sense at this point? And in a sense, what Councillor Inkster is saying, is it going to be a community-driven process, or are we, is staff looking to get our buy-in before things start? How do you see it rolling out?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Great question. I think we really want to start this at square one, build a real strong foundation. So what I would like to do is spend some time, significant time in 2023, building a project plan. My philosophy and best practice is council gets first crack at it. This is what we think. Here are the issues. We can extract these topic areas, whether it's neighborhood or whether it's topics as technical as servicing or as exciting as design, and extract questions and you know, have conversations with the Downtown Business Association, with Chamber of Commerce, the Sechelt Nation, with community associations before we say, hey, we've got an OCP, here's our draft, like really at that very early stage of we're building a project plan. And then we have a project plan formally endorsed by council, and through that project plan, there's an engagement plan. And are we working with a set select committee that will help us for the period of 1 or 2 years? Or are we more differently approaching that? And that's something where council will give us direction.
And you use the word best practice, or words best practices. What is a realistic time frame for an OCP process? Best practice.
We are on the record here, so I'll be careful. No, I would suggest, in seriousness, thank you, Your Worship, it is truly a great question. I would suggest that the bulk of the first and second quarter of 2023 is establishing our game plan, establishing our foundation. I do believe we will need some consultant support to get through this with our staffing level that we have. And there are two avenues. We could have a consulting support who simply helps us with engagement and flushing out those ideas, and then present us with a package and we write a document. Or we as staff with our local knowledge and local input and connections do that part of it and seek some support from a technical writer. So there's two avenues there. But I think with the staffing that we have and the expected demand of incoming and ongoing applications and other requests, that we'll need some support. And so that part of it would take into the better part of 2024. And I would suggest that by 2025, we can complete.
Thank you. Please, Councillor McLaughlin and then Councillor Inkster. Thanks. Your microphone, please.
I was just wondering, how does the OCP fit in with the regional growth strategy? and the numbers projected in there. And personally, I would also like to see a community-based approach at the same time. We used to have neighborhood plans for the neighborhoods. They are clearly defined, and they were kind of put aside for the OCP, and there's kind of summaries of them in the OCP. But I think, you know, in order to not repeat past mistakes, I think it's good to look at your old plans and go through them and talk to the community as a basis throughout any kind of planning. I wouldn't want to see this being a top-down type of plan based on strictly development, especially with our water concerns. That really has to be an umbrella for everything we do. There's no doubt about it. And also for sea rise. I mean, these are the focuses that were not in the OCP, really not clearly, but are really apparent to us now. And so I would like to see that kind of as a first principle and basis of developing a future OCP. And also, I reside in the village. I am concerned about, I don't know, people may not understand the difference between the village neighborhood, Sechelt neighborhood, village neighborhood, and Sechelt core. They're two different things. And we are a neighborhood, and the downtown core is the commercial part. And so that distinction has to continuously be made, because I think for new councillors and also for the public, it's very important to describe that clearly. But I was just noticing in page 13 of the District of Sechelt OCP extracts regarding growth, bylaw number 492/2010, is that the build-out potential with the current OCP is approximately 28,000 people, population. So we have an OCP that could, technically with what's in it now, provide space for 28,000 people, which really concerns me given our water issues. So I think we have to build back from that and take into account water resources, the number of units, and the amount of water that they're using. Plus, none of these different plans seem to really talk about tourism. And tourism is very important here, but also it has impact. So that has to be a big feature that we discussed. Also, environmental and social aspects. We talked about development here, economy and construction, but we need to also talk about how to protect the residents that live here and to start that as our first principles going forward. That's my two bits on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I think that what Councillor McLaughlin was mentioning is the difference in the downtown. So I would say Dolphin Street is a street that we look at as a differential between commercial and residential. And the plans that were put in to have that transitional commercial over the last number of years, what that has become through earlier delineation. But this is why I was talking about the time frame that was presented by Mr. Allen as an indication of why we may need to look at an earlier piece, which is the downtown neighborhood, and make some decisions regarding that before we move into the larger plan, because it's going to be a big issue. But what I would also say, if we proceed in that direction to consider neighborhoods and/or the larger plan, is that we talk about within the next while budgeting for a consultant, because that will most likely put a plan together quicker rather than later, rather than burdening staff with the development proposals and the fact that we need to do that right. Mm-hmm. With an additional piece. The OCP is a big deal, so we may need to look at a consultant. Mm-hmm. And we can look at what it cost us a number of years ago to give us an indication of what that may mean.
Yeah. I think I saw a smile on our Director of Planning's face when you said that, Councillor Inkster. Any other comments or points you'd like to raise regarding Planning Department report? Nope.
I have one more. If it's permissible. Okay, great.
Please, of course.
The transportation issue that Director Allen mentioned, and the transportation plan that was mentioned, we do have some transportation challenges in the district of Sechelt, the fact that we're in the middle of the coast and most of the traffic comes through here and people see what's happening at the lights regularly and the fact that that could be near failure, that intersection. If in fact we have a transportation plan that comes forward, what I would ask council to consider is that planning staff put some dollar figures and where some of the money will come from for some transportation changes. And that could be applications to other levels of government to help us improve our transportation problems because we're basically the linchpin of the Sunshine Coast. So it would be good if they identify some funding pieces that we could perhaps get funding from, as well as, I guess, gas tax if it's now, because now the criteria has changed, so we can use it for regular transportation. So I would love to see a transportation plan that has money, where money's going to come from to fulfill that plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Inkster. I'm seeing no other hands, so the next item on our agenda is what do we call it here? Adjournment. Am I missing anything? I'm kind of out of practice. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Toth, Councillor Bell, all in favor? We are adjourned, and